Today I have a question for you. Is the Consul Capri the coolest car UK Ford ever made? Well, it didn't sell very well and was only in production for 2.5 years. So is it cool, or should it not be made at all? To help us with this question, we welcome self-proclaimed Consul Capri fanatic, Bobby Pryor.
Of course it's the coolest car. This is my favourite car. Consul Capri, beautiful from the front, like any classic car that you could love. But the best thing is when you see it drive past you and drive away, because you've got these amazing lines. It has this beautiful roof line, and when you're under the window, it has a pillarless roof. It is so cool. And then you come back here and it has this sleek line out to the boot, and as it drives away from you, it really is the sexiest car on the road.
And there lies the problem. This car was signed off in 1956. So this car came out in 1962. So by then things had completely changed, with the Corsair and the Cortina being a far more modern kind of vehicle.
Another really cool thing about this car, and it's a bit of a 007 moment, because to fill her up, there's no fuel cap anywhere, because it's in here. I fell in love with this car because I loved the Chevy Impala, and I thought this was based on it, but it wasn't. The design was by Charles Thompson, and it was based on partly the Thunderbird and the Galaxy Sunliner, and you can see that in the images. What's also brilliant about this car is the size of the boot. I mean, look at it, it's huge.
And because of the size of the boot, you had to compromise in the back. I mean, you couldn't swing a cat back here.
And that's because it was only meant to be a 2+2.
And this car was just so expensive to make. In fact, it was £500 heavier than a Cortina. If you pull back the mat here, you can see all this steel in here covering the car. And that was another issue. Bobby chats to Steve Hart, who believes the Consul Capri could have stood a chance if it hadn't have gone for the 1950s feel. Here, he has created an award-winning Lotus Consul Capri.
Now, the Consul Capri, there was a standard and there was the much coveted GT, which they only made 2002 of them. But what's this?
This is the car that I always believed they should have built. There were rumours that Lotus had taken the Capri, but never got a deal with Ford going because the Cortina was coming onto line. So, in my opinion, this was the car that would have saved and would have been the sport Ford of the day.
Okay, but have Lotus actually got a version of this?
There's really strong rumours and evidence that they had 3 of them. 2 of them don't exist, and 1 of them is reputed to still exist with its original engine and its Lotus build sheet. Lotus aren't saying it's an official car. It was only ever a customer production car. So whether or not that's correct, or whether they were ever going to go into production, no one will ever really know.
Okay, so this looks pretty standard to me. I mean, it looks really familiar. I know this dash. It doesn't have a lot of kind of nuts and bolts extra. Obviously, you've got the GT dials there from the GT.
Yes.
But it looks pretty standard. So explain to me what it is then.
I wanted it to look much like the Lotus Cortina was done. They only use Cortina parts. There are some subtle differences in here.
That Speedo.
Yes.
Speedo's not a standard Consul Capri, is it?
No, 90 mile an hour wouldn't really have cut it.
Okay, with your engine.
For a sport car, no. That was a hard to find item there. The club members helped me out massively getting hold of one of those.
So that's from the GT?
That's a GT.
Because it goes up to 110.
Colours have been changed in it.
Okay.
Because that's different to a GT colour dash, but intrinsically, yeah, it's the GT internals.
One thing I did notice also about the interior and the front of the car, because there are changes there.
Yes.
But the steering wheel's different. The 5 stars have gone from the
front,
and also the 5 stars have gone from the front.
Yeah, the 5 stars have completely been eradicated from the car. It was wanting to look like a almost like a 1960s touring car, like the Lotus race. We're going to race them. So I just wanted a little bit more of an aggressive look. The steering wheel length had to be changed. I wouldn't have wanted to drive the speeds of this car. I'll go out with this Bakelite steering wheels and bits and pieces, but the front end was, I just wanted a slightly different look for it, and it evolved on its own. The bumper was two bumpers which I actually cut and took the ends off, and it was a real sort of faff because then nothing's available. They'd never modified these in the day. So I did what I could with it. I put it together to see what it would look like, and the finish isn't quite as I wanted it. And then since I've crushed it as well, it will get repaired and updated to be more like what I believe Lotus would have done with the car.
And you're keeping the wraparound bumpers?
Yes, probably. I'll see how the car comes out. I'll see what it looks like. The whole car has sort of built itself. It's lent itself to the way it looks. I've really followed where the car wanted to go. The initial thing was my father sort of, I wanted to do it black. It was my father who very much sort of like, oh, I'll do it white. I'm not a lover of white cars, but he was so passionate about doing it and getting the engine and making the car that it is what it is today because of what he thought it should be. And to be honest with you, I've loved doing it, and I've loved it the way it's come out.
So, what we haven't talked about is the paintwork, because you've got the Lotus green stripe, which is so synonymous with Lotus.
Yeah, again, back to Dad really. He said it needed, if it had the engine, it can legitimately wear the green stripe rather than being a fake something. So yeah, it's proper Ashwood green. But the laying out of it, it was so simple. It just followed the line of the car. And when you actually look, it's actually quite similar to the layout lines of the Cortina. They have so many similarities. It lent itself to the stripe. It wasn't an unnatural thing to mask out. I'm no painter, but I did it myself. And I found it really easy to follow the curve of the car, and it made the same shape as the Cortina one, as a very natural progression.
What I want to know is what's under the bonnet.
Under the bonnet is a period correct Lotus twin cam engine.
Okay, so did you have to kind of strengthen this car to get that in?
No, the car was fairly strong. The suspension and the steering were always questionable in these cars, so they've been changed and modified slightly, but maintaining a completely original chassis. So the chassis has not been altered at all. There's no extra strength in the chassis, but the components that bolt onto the original mountings have been altered to make the car handle and drive a little.
You kept the leaf springs?
Leaf springs are on it.
Yeah.
But I used the old lever arm damper mounting points to put coilover shocks on it, just to make sure I could get rid of the roll and keep the car in a straight line.
How much power is under the bonnet? That's what.
For 1963, it was a lot of power. Modern cars, it's a very low power. It sits about 105 to 110 horsepower, which really isn't an awful lot in modern standards, but for its day it was an incredible amount of power. So if you take it down to second now and floor it, that's when you'll feel that it's got.
The Consul Capri originally was criticised because it was underpowered. I mean, they improved the engine.
Yes.
And the GT, of course, even better.
Yeah.
But you've got such a huge difference. What's the difference in speed between the GT and you?
I don't know. I mean, obviously the GT was developed, the heads were developed by Cosworth.
Yes.
Now this is obviously Lotus,
yeah.
But this has got the twin cam, whereas it will be significantly quicker than a Capri GT.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure what it will be. I know what it can do.
The other thing I've noticed in this cabin is this huge kind of gearbox space. So
Yes.
what's in the gearbox?
So the gearbox is a original Ford casing.
Yeah.
With Lotus gear in it, so it's got a 2.5 first gear in it. This is a remote gear selector shift, so the gearbox mounting normally comes out by the floor, and this is a conversion kit that brings the gear stick further back.
I want to talk brakes with you because they're not the same, surely.
The brakes are fair. Well, the principles are the same. Same brake circuitry. The back brakes are standard GT, which is the same brakes that Lotus took the brakes off of this to use on the Mark 1 Cortina. So if they were good enough for a Mark 1 Lotus Cortina, in my opinion, these didn't need changing. They were good enough. The fronts, again, it had the Girling, I think they were P14, 16 calipers, which the Lotus Cortina used, but because of the extra weight in this car, because it's significantly heavier than a Cortina, lots of wasted metal in these, I did put vented discs on the front to give it a little bit more.
Okay.
To stop them from overheating, really. That was all it was. The brake power is no different to a Lotus Cortina, but these just handle the heat a little better.
Now, I love the sound of the improvements, but I just want to ask you this question.
Yes.
Because I think this is the coolest car ever. Is this the coolest Ford made in the UK, do you think?
Well,
Come on, this is the coolest Ford that they ever made in the UK.
Well, I think it's cool now, but I can see why it wasn't so cool back in 1962. But if I'm really honest with you, I think I prefer a Mark I Cortina.
Okay, what's your verdict? Put it in the comments below.
And make sure you subscribe and hit that notification button so you never miss an episode.
And if you want to see the story about my Consul Capri, watch this video.
We'll see you next time down the barns. Perfect!
Cortina! Cortina! Loser!